Hello there, I'm another Magento dev. Welcome to another video. The second video, in fact, in like a bit of a crash course, because I found these things like one thing leads on to another. The second video, this one follows on from a video I did with regards to a beginner's guide to the block. And I thought to myself, I can take it a little bit further. This one is regarding knockout.js. So it's a beginner's guide, crash course to knockout.js, a couple of different methods of using it, specifically within Magento 2. Okay, so last time out we looked at the block and we got something set up with regards to like I was going to put a timer on the product page, but basically, if you want to check that video out, rather than me explaining it in this video, I'll put a card up there now. Just give that a click, watch that video, lead you onto this video. But if you understand the block and you can kind of pick it up and hit the ground running with regards to the blocking modules, then, and to be honest, we're not going to touch the block in this video, and you want to know about knockout.js, then stick with us. And you know what, stick to the end as well, because that really helps the old video out. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do, and it's something that I thought would be useful to cover, is we're going to move these layout files, these template files, and we're going to move them into an extension, because now we're getting into the more complex functionality. So we're getting into the JavaScript, we're getting into the knockout.js structure. I want it in a module. I don't want to be writing knockout.js in my theme. Don't ask me why I don't. I just don't, and I don't think you should either. Get it in a module. It's just neater, because you never know where these things are going to go. These things sort of expand, and you can end up with loads of functionality knocking about in a theme that probably is quite generic and could be put in a module, and you could use it on all different sites. You know, say for example, we do in the end create a timer, like an offer timer or a sale timer or something for a product page. Then, other than the sort of branding in the styles, that's something that can be used on other sites, in it. So let's get it out the theme. So it's fairly simple to do. You've just got to be careful of this file here, the layout file. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm literally just going to drag. No, I'm not. I'm just going to create first of all a view folder, because that's the difference. We've got to enter the view folder, and in the view folder you've got templates. Done this a million times. Templates, and you've also got front end, and then you've got templates, and then inside front end here you've also got layout. So that's the difference between a module and a theme. This is already the front end. Because modules interact with back end and front end functionality, you've got to specify your view as being front end, because obviously you can specify your view as admin HTML as well, which I've covered in other videos. Pop a card up for a video on that if you're interested, but don't leave this one, not yet. Right, because this is a good one, promise. So I'm gonna drag this file into my layout, and I'm gonna drag this file, this folder with this file into my templates. Okay, and then to be fair, I can just nuke these. Right, so now I've just got to make sure like this is all named correctly, and really it's literally this that I have to change. So it's the namespace essentially of the module, and the clue is Jesus, and the clue is here. Add countdown, so I've just called it countdown within there. Right, so this should all pick up where it left off. Alright, got another window open here. I'll just open up. Huh, where's it gone? I'll open up a new one. Just opening up another browser there, with my site on it. Test site, so I'll just go to the beans I was using. Go for some different beans. Right, so essentially it's still outputting the string from a block. So this is probably one of the most basic usages of a block. But we can accomplish this functionality, and this is what I'm going to build up as I always do. We can accomplish this functionality within knockout.js just the same. So essentially, we're going to replace this function here, and I'm going to show you how to pass some variables later on. Probably in another video now, but first of all, we're just going to get some knockout.js going, and as we get it going, you'll probably start to sort of see a use case for it within your own projects, because it's one of them things where it's really useful when you know of a use for it. Otherwise, you can just, because you can do things in so many different ways. This is the thing that I really try and sort of labour on this channel, and I'm doing it right now, is that there's so many different ways of doing things. There's so many right ways to do things. There's just certain ways that are more right than others. And for something like where well, for a timer essentially, something that's going to interact with the DOM every second or whatever, knockout.js is what you want to use. I mean, you can do it with jQuery, but let's look at it from a Magento perspective. And knockout observables, knockout the writer is the better way of doing it, even though you can achieve it with other things. Outputting a string, what I'm going to do now, and outputting and working with some variables, you could do that within your block. But I've done a video about the block. I'm going to show you how to do that. And the thing is, showing you how to do that, I'll get you started with knockout. Right, so let's get started with knockout, and I'll stop rambling on. So I'm going to remove the reference to my string out of this here. And I'm going to paste this in because it saves me typing it out. So this is typical, I'm just going to remove that for now. So this is typical this is the most basic usage. All we're going to do is pass some data from the front end, and this data at this point is a string. We're going to pass some data in the Magento init tag through to data bind to this node here. These nodes, data bind is something that Knockout uses, but obviously you can use these in jQuery. Other frameworks use the concepts you're going to learn here are quite quite robust in terms of JavaScript. Now I can't really go through the sort of wider JS picture, because obviously this looks similar to, for example, Svelte. This concept is similar to Svelte, it's similar to Vue, it's similar to React probably. I mean, I don't particularly use React that much, but they're all fairly similar. The idea of passing data backward and forward and updating on the fly and updating without page load updating, so that's sort of like PWA, single file component concept. I mean, this isn't a single file component, as you're going to find out. That is the one big difference, I think, between Magento's application of Knockout and probably native Knockout, but and other frameworks. So, right, this is how you set it up anyway. I hope I'm not going on too much, but I like to really explain the sort of the stuff behind this, behind, like the thinking behind it, because I rather than just sort of type a load of code out and get you to copy it. So we're always, the most basic application is this. You're always going to be using the Magento UI.js core app as your sort of initial node for the object. Then we're going to be talking about the component. Now a component within knockout.js essentially is just going to tell you the scope of sort of like the anchor of where it's going to anchor, where you're going to anchor to. You always need, like, and again I'm talking about other frameworks, but like Vue, you always need a sort of an entry point to the application. It's normally like ID of app or something like that, because there needs to be like it's almost like in Vue.js it's like the virtual DOM. In this it's just it's an anchor point to bind to bind your HTML to. And I know in this one it's pretty basic, but we'll talk through it. So the next sort of key, if you like, in the object is timer scope. Now this can be anything. I've called it timer scope, but it is your scope, and you've got to you've got to sort of put that on your initial div. It wouldn't work, but if you had like just basically that there and you tried to bind your text to it, that's not gonna happen. But this works, right? So you've got to bind your scope, then you tell it the component. So the component is the JS file. So I'm gonna start by creating this JS file, and this is where you sort of, it looks a bit like Magento layout XML. So you're going to feel these things through in Magento, and you're going to find them quite familiar, hopefully, and it's going to help you sort of get used to how it all works. So, and how Magento works is like an MVC sort of concept. So we have another folder in front end called web. We've seen it before. You can we use it in themes for putting all of our sort of like accompanying SCSS and JavaScript and images. So web is utilized for, as we know, JS files. So we're looking at this, gets us into web. This component key knows we're looking in web. It's like, as I say, it's similar on your this knows we're in layout. Do you know what I mean? So that's familiar. You're comfortable with that. I know you are. You're all clever. You're all clever. You just, you know, you don't know what you don't know. Right, and so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to create the file. Now I've called it knockout.js. Now notice that in my reference in here, there's no JS at the end. So it's like an ES6 import, if you're familiar with those. I'm going all over here, aren't I? I'm going all over the frameworks. I'm going all over the place, but hopefully you're following on. So this is a good way of me explaining this, because I've got like a little string here, but this could easily be, because as you can see, this is like a translatable string. So this could easily be what we talked about in the other one. I'm not going to do it, but this could easily be a product variable, like get name, and we could pass that into our JavaScript file. But for now, we're not going to. We'll have a look at that in a sec. So I'm using like a Magento sort of PHP string there, and I've called it timer message. So this is important once we get into our JS file. So now this is the most basic usage. So now we're in our JS file. What we've got to do first of all, and it's similar when I've done tutorials on getting jQuery in there. Look, I'll show you. It's similar. You've got to define your third-party libraries, essentially. So in this one, I'm defining knockout, and that's how you would do it. And then I am going to write an overriding sort of function that will use knockout. So I could put this on another line, and it might make a bit more sense. An overriding function that can use knockout, and I'm just going to return all of my JavaScript in one place. But you can break it up, and I'm going to show you breaking it up in a bit, so stick around. It's going to take off. Return, and then I'm going to return a function of utilize, and I can come back to that. I'm going to return a function, and now, right, Magento is good in its sort of conventions. It uses this config, and config is being passed from anything within my scope at the minute. So config is like the overall key, and then within that I've got my variables, and my variable that I'm going to use is timer message. So I'm passing config in, which means that I can use this heading, and the reason I'm using this heading is because I've called that heading, so that links to, essentially, and it's just a bit of text, so I'm saying data band text, that links to this here, this heading, and then I'm going to say equals config and then timer message, right? So that is going to return from my config that I've specified there. And you think, well, why would you bother? It's just a string. But yeah, but imagine you've got like the product name or a SKU or some other bit of data that's going to be different on every product. Well, that's going to pass through this JavaScript file, and then it's going to render as knockout.js, which is, you know, what we're after. I mean, I haven't quite. You can actually write it like this, so you can do it as a knockout observable. I'm going to do it as one, even though I don't need it to be, because a knockout observable is something that's going to keep an eye out for data, as it says observable. It's going to keep an eye out for data changes in the back end. But for a string and something that loads on page load, well, we're not going to need to use it but it's just to show you that we can, because that'll become useful further down the line when we start manipulating the DOM. Not in this video, but we start manipulating the DOM. And you might already know what manipulations you want, and you can feel your way through it. I'll give you a start, and you can feel your way through it, and start to sort of get your own JavaScript code working with this boilerplate code, which is kind of quite generic and works within, you know, gets you set up within Magento. So let's go to the front end, and I'm hoping I've covered everything off. I'm just going to refresh this.
To burst. Wait for it to burst. Wait for it, look out.
Okay, forget it. So this is wrong. Written incorrectly. So it looks better on one line there. That's how it's meant to be. Look. So I had a bracket there instead of the bracket at the end, busting my JavaScript. Right. So let's get, there we go. It's already there. I must have refreshed it. So there we go. We've got, it's showing our string, and it's getting it from here. So as I mentioned before, if we want to get some product data, we could say $_product get, say, and we could pass this PHP variable into our JavaScript component that we've now built. So if I just refresh that, should get the product name there. Brilliant. So that's the most basic use, going sort of grabbing data from the front end, processing it into a sort of a, what would you call it, a data bind. That's the best way to put it. So we could have a few of these. We could have, you know, a bit of HTML. We could flesh out, scaffold out the HTML here, and we could pass our variables to it from JavaScript. But it's, for me, that's a bit pointless unless you're manipulating that data within your JavaScript file, because we could just do that from your block, as we've sort of demonstrated in other videos. You can have ways of getting that product information, just outputting it. It doesn't have to be HTML. So knockout and HTML, it doesn't have to be. But it gets us started. It gets us to grips with how this structure works, and it's the structure that I wanted to talk about this here. So that I wanted to have a look at in this video, because it is an advancement on block, or it works with block if you like. So they're a nice pairing. Right then, so let's raise it a little bit. You can also use, and you've probably seen it in Magento core files, or you probably experienced it as even as beginners, but you can actually render HTML files, so not PHTML files. You can render HTML files to the page, and you can do that. You do that specifically using knockout.js. Okay, so first thing you need is a template folder. When you're in web and it's for knockout, for HTML files, it's template. So it's templates up here, template down there. Ain't gonna work. So we've got a template folder. In that, we're gonna put our HTML file with some HTML in it. So we're gonna just bobber div in it with this is rendered by knockout. Right then. So how do we let Magento know about this file? Because currently it only knows about the component, which is the JavaScript file. So you let it, it's like cascading effect. So now we're going to let Magento know about the HTML file within the JavaScript file. So there's some boilerplate for this, what I basically use every time. And we'll talk through it rather than type it out, because I type things wrong, don't I, when I'm talking. So here we go. We've got the differences are UI component is now been brought in as a library, and we're specifying the component in the function, and then we're returning that component and extending it, and we are extending it utilizing, and this is the bit I like, because I like JavaScript frameworks like Vue and Svelte. I like Vue and Svelte, only Vue and Svelte, and this is what it resembles. So it resembles those frameworks when we're talking about specifying your data variables, and you're specifying a template, so the HTML file, within your defaults, within these variables here, and then you just need an initialize function and basically something to contain this super. You don't need that yet, but you've probably seen, that would work essentially, but you've probably seen that I'm going to be using config here because I want to continue using the variables that I'm passing from the message, right? So I want to continue using that, so I'm going to pass config into here because I was passing it. So this was the other function that I was using. So this was the most basic function. I was passing config into that function. Now I'm passing it into my initialize function, so I can utilize it. So I can utilize those variables. So this is a nice simple boilerplate, right? So we've got the timer there, PHTML file, and we're telling Magento that that's the one we're going to use. So this is your basic structure, ladies and gentlemen. And let's just give this a refresh. Right, it isn't working, and it isn't working because there's a specific way of doing this in the PHTML file that applies, and I deleted it earlier. There was a spoiler. Right, and also I don't think my static content version updated fully. So I'm just going to that. Right. So in my timer PHTML, I need to use this here. It's commented out, but it is the get template function. This is how we render HTML. So I need my get template function in there. Hopefully this will build on refresh. No, it ain't working. What are we missing? What am I missing? Some HTML files in there. Let's have a quick look. I've got a couple of errors. See what these are. Hopefully they'll be useful. Yeah, it's because I haven't included my heading, right? So I'm going to put that back in now. I'm going to put that back into my JavaScript file. I was going to hold off and do it in a second. Right then, so I want to reintroduce my heading. So I'm just going to grab it off my other boilerplate. I knew I should have just commented it out before. So after the template is loaded, I'm going to go back and get my heading and output that on initialization also. So this should now work. Lovely, lovely. Right, so I've got my heading, so that's coming from the template. And now this is what's rendering from my HTML document. So that is the sort of simple structure. It's the structure in it. It's the folder structure that's important. It's where do things get called, how do these things link together, and you could be, you could be well experienced with Vue. I was when I started using this, when I started really getting into Knockout for Magento, and it still sort of escaped me. I thought, where do I start? Like I understood the concept, but I thought, well, where do I put things? That's where you put things. That's how you structure it. So I'll show you a couple more things before we wrap this up. So these are quite useful, and because now we're looking at, well, what's the benefit of using this over sort of just doing it via PHTML? Well, to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't think of one. But it is when you start from this application, it's when you start getting more complicated within your actual JavaScript that it becomes useful. But I will show you one more sort of knockout feature, if you like. That's quite useful. And I'm just going to add a variable in here. And I'm going to add a variable called allow. And then, no, that don't work. Variable called allow that I can utilize in my template. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this parameterized, right? So this information in here, and you utilize, and I'm showing you it because it's a sort of a knockout-y thing, but it does resemble, like I mentioned before, things like Svelte. I know Vue has like vif and v4, but Knockout, you do it this way. So you've got a if statement here. So if allowed, render the HTML. So we'll test it both ways. So if allowed, not showing because I've got it set to false. So you can see how these things can start to become dynamic. Like If you have another JavaScript function in here that then manipulates this variable and switches it on after a AJAX request or something or other, or you could even connect it to other APIs if you really wanted to, in a conventional sense with using JavaScript. Is it going to work? Yeah. So true, false. So it's useful stuff. So that is like a crash course basic application of knockout.js in Magento 2 on the product page. We've covered using variables. We've covered a lot of good stuff in there. But that's your basic structure. I hope that's been useful. I really hope you stayed to the end. You obviously did if you're hearing me now. If you like this type of content, give us a like on the video. Comment, it all really helps. Send it to your Magento dev mates, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.